Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Cover 2 Pod. I'm your co-host, Jared Smith.
And I'm Nenad.
And we got a big show for you guys today. Week 3 of the NFL officially in the books after my Dallas Cowboys stomped all over the Eagles last night during Monday Night Football. We got week 4 of college football, a couple big games, not too many, but we're going to look ahead to next week's games where we have 3 top 25 matchups to get to. So a lot of NFL talk today, a lot of college football talk today. But first, we got to start with our man, Nick. He has a close to the heart moment that he would like to talk about, something to do with college football, but I'm just going to leave the floor to you, my man. So go ahead and get us started with this.
Yeah, well, I know the people watching this podcast don't necessarily get in the deep annals of ESPN Plus on a Saturday morning, but I do, now this season because my brother plays for the Yale Bulldogs. And, first game of the season, you got on a couple plays of special teams, wasn't that big of a deal. Didn't seem like he was going to play that much this season. He's a freshman, not a big concern, right? It happens to everybody. But last Saturday, in a close game against, I believe it was Cornell, my brother Chase, on his first pass attempt as a wide receiver, scored a 25-yard touchdown. And so I just want to give him a shout out. He's 1 for 1. He still has no other catches. Not that they didn't want to go to him, but the game just didn't flow like that. He caught it, I believe, in the second quarter, and they were able to run the ball the rest of the game and not use receivers as much. But to say I'm a proud brother is an understatement. It was a moment I can't describe. Like, there's only like 5 other moments in sports that I've watched where I've had that feeling of just pure happiness, and that was that one. And so I'm hoping it leads to better things. I'm hoping that it leads to more opportunities for him. And they lost the first game and they didn't play him. So look what happens the second game, right? And he gets a big touchdown, and it wasn't that high scoring of a game. So to give a little trash talk there on the Yale offense, but it's going to be. They have 8 more games this season. There's no playoffs for the Ivy League, so the Ivy League championship it means a lot. So even though they lost their first game, wasn't an Ivy League game, and they won against Cornell, and they're 1-0 in the Ivy League. So yeah, just want to get that off my chest really quickly. I know you guys didn't watch it, right? I know you might have saw me and Jared on Twitter talking about it and stuff like that, but if you didn't see Twitter, you don't have social media. Big moment that happened. And I'll update you if anything else happens throughout the season. But, yeah, I know you guys aren't going on, to early ESPN Plus games, especially when you have those Fox, big noon games going on in some of those ESPN games. So just give you a little update on my personal life there.
I mean, they might now, right? I mean, there's never a time like now to switch over and start watching some Ivy League football, right?
That's true.
Now that we have a personal connection and a reason to watch Yale, I'm going to be watching every chance I get, man. Listen, he's 1 for 1, right? And he's a beast out there.
Yeah.
Like, he is right now, I don't know how fast he is, but I do know that no cornerback, no safety, no linebacker is going to be able to bully him. Like, he is going to be able to get to his spot. I saw that when he played at Mission, and then obviously I saw the touchdown that you put up on Twitter, which is pretty awesome, man. So shout out to Chase. That's awesome, man. We wish him nothing but the best. We got 2 of his biggest supporters over here. I know you're going to a game later this season. Is it Yale Harvard?
Yeah, it's Yale Harvard in Boston. So it's an away game, but yeah, it's I'm gonna try to get to it every single year, but especially when he actually got that touchdown last week, I literally booked my tickets right now. I'm like, all right, I'll be there. The chance to see him play in front of a big crowd. Those Ivy League games don't generate that big of crowds. Obviously, it's Division 2 or Division FCS. And with COVID and stuff on the East Coast, it's a little different with crowds over there and vaccination status and stuff like that. But the Harvard-Yale game will be stacked. And that game is actually on ESPN, I believe, too. So, they actually will put a lot into that. And Yale will win that game because Harvard is trash. And I will say that every single day on this podcast. I think I dislike Harvard a little bit more than the Seattle Seahawks or the San Francisco Giants on this podcast now.
Wow. Full brotherly love, literally right there.
Absolutely. But Jared, let's just sort of stick with college football because we're on the topic. The other thing on Twitter that I decided to do over the weekend was to release my top 10 on Sunday for college football. And there might be some questions that people had that asked, and I've been naming every fraud left and right in college football, and I have been 100% correct on every single one of them so far. Even if they were a top team in college football the last couple years. So we're going to start with that and just overall college football talk, and then we'll get into the games next week that feature some of these top 10 teams. But so here's my top 10, Jared, and I want you to just debate me and discuss it with me and tell me what you think. So I got Alabama football at number 1. Obviously, Crimson Tide have been the best team in college football, although played a very close game against Florida. I think a lot of people thought that might not be as close. I respect the Florida game, and so that was close, but it's still number 1. I have Georgia at number 2. They have the win against Clemson. They've been dominating the rest of their opponents, so I'm going to keep it number 2. Number 3 is the Florida Gators. Jared, we've kind of talked about this on the podcast, but I know that this is very controversial. It's a one-loss team, but I don't see Florida being any lower than that because they proved that they could almost beat Alabama. I mean, they were a 2-point conversion away from going to overtime with the team, and overtime is essentially a toss-up. So, they're as close as it gets, and I think they're just one little step below Georgia. But even with one loss, that one loss is to Alabama. I don't think they should be punished with that at all. Number 4, I got Oregon football. Again, big wins on the season so far, and then, of course, they've been dominating the rest of their opponents, and their only close game this season was against Fresno State, who's a ranked team and is gone on to have a pretty good season beating UCLA. Number 5, I got the Arkansas Razorbacks. They got a big game against Georgia this week. Arkansas, I respect the SEC, and I think that when you look at who they've beaten and the way they've beaten those teams, it's more impressive than Penn State, who I have at number 6 in the Big Ten. I just don't respect the Big Ten as much this year, so I got them at number 6. Notre Dame at number 7. Very, very odd, impressive win against Wisconsin when their quarterback went out of the game. So I don't know what to think about this team. They're undefeated, but I think they're not the best undefeated team. They're a level below Penn State, so I'll put them at number 7. Number 8, Iowa. They've gone from being really impressive to having a couple sketchy wins against some not very good teams, so they need to do more, and they're going to have to kind of run the table this season. So I have that number 8. Number 9, Cincinnati, undefeated but not a Power 5 team, so they're my kind of team on the outside looking. And then Ole Miss, undefeated at number 10. I essentially just wanted to put them above a lot of the other one-loss teams that the NCAA decided to keep up there, like Clemson and like Ohio State, who look like trash this season. So, Jared, that's my top 10. I know you probably have questions about Ohio State and Clemson maybe, but yeah, what do you have to say about that, and where do you agree and disagree?
No, listen, Clemson is complete frauds. I would, so is Ohio State, but like if we're talking about a fraud level or fraud degree, Clemson is like a, 5-star fraud. They just simply do not have it this year, right? They've got all 5 stars, and they're on high alert, the highest of alerts. And so I do not disagree with you with keeping them out of the top 10 at all. Ohio State, it's one of those things where you mentioned it with a couple of those other teams that you have in your top 10, but Ohio State is dealing with a injury to their quarterback, at least their starting quarterback in C.J. Stroud, who's dealing with a throwing shoulder. I think it's like a strain or something, and he was held out of Ohio State's last game that they played last week, more for precautionary reasons. Like he's still suited up, and he was the quote-unquote like emergency quarterback. So if something went absolutely wrong and their first 2 quarterbacks went down, he could have played. Fortunately, they were playing. Who were they playing? The Akron Zips. So I'm pretty sure they didn't necessarily need C.J. Stroud for that game.
Yeah.
But and they are in the Big Ten. I thought that they had like a more difficult schedule coming up. I just put up their schedule right now. They're at Rutgers, right? And then they're home against Maryland, at Indiana, and then home against Penn State. So they've really, in a sense, kind of got 3 more just games that they should dominate. And then a real test, their real only test of the year against number 4 Penn State ranked right now. So just to clear that out of the way, I don't have any problems really with those 2 teams being out. And there's not much that I can argue with your top 10. Maybe like one moving up or down a spot. I think most people would freak out about you having Florida in your top 5 with
Of course.
with one loss on their record already. But when I'm looking at it, you're right. Cincinnati, they deserve to be in the top 10, but they're not Power 5. It's just if they were to go up against Alabama or Georgia or Oregon or any of those teams, they're going to get smacked. Just simple as that. Arkansas, they're playing very well, right? And they're in the SEC. So they get a big matchup every single weekend, even if it's not necessarily against a top 25 opponent. The fact that they are just in the SEC kind of automatically elevates them, and they have showed out well. I think most notably their biggest win so far was probably against Texas. Would you say?
Well, it's Texas and Texas A&M. They've beaten them in back-to-back weeks. And the Texas game, if you look at what Texas did last week, they were about to put up 80 against Texas Tech, who was undefeated going into that game. Now, I don't think Texas Tech is a legitimate threat this year, but when you beat a team that is undefeated and you're almost putting 80 points on their defense, like that's impressive. It's not like Arkansas beat a bad Texas team. They beat a good Texas team who most likely will be ranked within the rest. You know, they're probably going to beat Oklahoma because Oklahoma, besides Clemson, might be the number one fraud this year in college football. Oh my goodness, they can barely beat anybody. And then Texas A&M, they were ranked. I was calling them frauds as being a top 5 team. They are still a good college football team, but I had a feeling they were going to lose at some point. It just ended up being to Arkansas.
Well, Texas A&M, they're dealing with their starting quarterback who got injured as well. He got injured a couple weeks ago against Colorado, and I'm not sure if he's out for the whole season, but he's going to be out for the majority of the year. So you would think that Texas A&M can recruit and have another 4 or 5 star guy ready to go. Obviously, with Jimbo Fisher there, they should be okay. But it seems like they're kind of treading water a little bit and teetering. Obviously, with the loss to Arkansas and then barely escaping Colorado. They're kind of on the rocks. So coming into the year, I had higher expectations for Texas A&M, and I think because their starting quarterback went down, they've just fallen off, and they haven't been able to get back on the ropes. So,
well, and that's part of it, Jared. It's just the same as Ohio State. We're not going to rank you high because your quarterback's hurt. If you lose because your quarterback's hurt, that means your roster is worse, right? Like it's like people want to keep these teams up there, but just in case that guy comes back, they'll have a chance. Well, no. Sometimes when people aren't healthy, your team isn't as good. I mean, look at like the Cowboys last year, right? Like, no offense, Jared, but like when Dak Prescott went down, they just weren't as good of a team. Are the Cowboys supposed to be kept up in the playoff ranks because Dak might come back if that was the possibility last year? No. No. And college football, it seems, not only with that kind of stuff, but like when you look at the rankings right now too, the real rankings have, Oregon at number 3, which I agree with. You have Penn State, Iowa 4-5, Oklahoma number 6. Okay, well, I get it. You're trying to get those conferences into the Final Four at the end of the season in the college football playoffs, but that's not the way it should work. And if you look at my rankings, it's based on opponents they've beaten, which is really important because when you look at some of these teams' big wins, they're not as impressive. Like, I almost put Florida at number 2 because Clemson looks like such trash that win Georgia has is looking worse and worse the more Clemson loses, right? It doesn't matter that they were number 5 at the beginning of the season if they end up 8-4, right? Like, who cares about that? It's a big game, but hell, I think they were even at home, Georgia. So, yeah, for me, I just tried to do it as legitimate as possible, and I wanted to keep those teams that look like frauds out of there, like Oklahoma and Ohio State specifically, with the undefeated record and the 1 loss, because just because you were ranked by a couple of college football heads at the beginning of the season at number 3 should not mean that you should just remain in there when you look like trash every week. Like, I don't understand that about college football people. Now, when the college football playoff comes out in about a month, I think we'll see a lot different. And then here's the other thing, Jared. We could probably just move to this unless you have any other questions. Do you have any other questions about my top 10?
No, like I said, I think there's maybe a team or two that I can say, oh, maybe I put them ahead 1 spot, but that's arguing, apples and oranges. We're not going to do that here. I say we move on and we get to the games because I think that's more something we should be talking about.
Well, and by the way, again, guys, calm down. Like, a lot of these rankings are going to be shuffled up a ton. And there's a lot of title eliminator games in a lot of ways coming up this week. Like I mentioned, I have number 2 Georgia facing number 5 Arkansas. Okay, now that's 2 versus 8. But so I have 2 versus 5. If Arkansas is able to win that game, maybe both those teams that get in. But if Georgia beats Arkansas, that's going to make it tough for them to get into the college football playoff. So again, this is why they play the games. Cincinnati versus Notre Dame. That's 7 versus 9 in real life. In my college football, it is 7 versus 9 as well. Yeah, 7 versus 9 as well. Look at that. I actually had the same thing. So 100% one of those teams is title eliminated when they lose. Cincinnati or Notre Dame will not be in the title picture for the college football playoff when they lose that game. And because in college football, there's no ties. So, and then you also have Ole Miss and Alabama. If Ole Miss can do what Florida did a couple weeks ago, not only does that kind of make it more realistic that Alabama could lose this season, but number 2, it vaults Ole Miss up there to give them a chance as well. Again, just because Ole Miss was ranked low to begin the season does not mean that they should be punished by losing to Alabama by like 3 points if they do. I don't expect that to happen. I think Alabama will crush Lane Kiffin because he wants to. And I don't expect that to happen. But if Ole Miss does beat Alabama, obviously that creates a lot of stuff. And then Ole Miss, my number 10 team, gets knocked out of the top 10 and out of title contention. So there's potentially 5 teams that could get knocked around where they are and will move this weekend based on those games. So, yeah, I mean, and that's all I really have to say. Like, there's a lot to go on this weekend. Florida has a relatively easy schedule for the next month. But that's why I have them ranked high, because they've done what they're supposed to do so far. I don't think they should be.
I was gonna roast you. I was waiting for you to slip up when you were talking about Ole Miss and say all Ole Miss has to do is go into Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and beat the number 1 Crimson Tide.
I'm realistic. I was like, I'm gonna bet the Alabama -14 for that game. I think they'll win by at least 3 touchdowns.
I know. I'm just saying, you never know, right? Sometimes we get caught up in the moment, and sometimes we slip up. That was one of those moments where I was like, "Oh, please go ahead," because I'm gonna roast you. You didn't. You made the good argument that yes, Ole Miss needs to keep the game close, show that they can be competitive with the number 1 team in the country, and I think that they will stay and hover around that number 12 spot. Obviously, maybe drop a few spots, but if they can keep it within a touchdown game or cover and make it look like they're a good team, then yes, they'll stay around there. I do have the record for Nick Saban going up against his former assistants. We all know that Lane Kiffin, after he had his debacle at USC, revitalized his career as the offensive coordinator at Alabama before getting the job. Where did he get the job before Ole Miss?
He went to Florida Atlantic and tried to, a very random college football team. He went there and tried to just last chance you it kind of, and just get a bunch of players that were high profile players that kind of had some mistakes on their record. Let's just say that. And it didn't work out. I mean, they were a great team for that division, but it didn't work out. And then he gets the job at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss has looked really impressive this year. And they, like I mentioned, I think what's Ole Miss's really impressive win this season? Let me go back and look. There's so many games every week.
Go back and look, because
they're the team that made Oklahoma look like more frauds. They beat Tulane by 40. And so when you look at Oklahoma, they beat Tulane by 5. Okay, and so that was where I gave a little bit more respect to Ole Miss. Now, again, Ole Miss undefeated. They will play Alabama, and whatever happens to them this weekend will prove what their season is. So who cares where those teams are ranked right now? But I moved them up a little bit because I'm like, you know what? Might as well. You're undefeated. I think you're better than Ohio State. You've played all the teams you're supposed to play, and you've crushed all of them. I don't see a problem in that. And Tulane, Oklahoma, I think is still a top 25 team, and they lost by 5. So. Similar to Fresno State.
Here's the problem. Here's the pessimist, the negative Nancy coming out. Nick Saban, his former assistants going up against him, 0-16 combined. Don't have.
Wow, I did not think that was what that was.
Derek Dooley, coached at Tennessee, 0-3 record. Jim McElwain at Colorado State and Florida, 0-3 record. Will Muschamp at Florida, 0-2 record. Mark D'Antonio, Michigan State, 0-2. Jimbo Fisher, Florida State and Texas A&M, 0-2. Jeremy Pruitt, Tennessee, 0-1. Bill Napier, University of Lafayette, 0-1. And Kirby Smart at Georgia, who has had the closest combined score playing 2 games, but he's still 0-2. So
yeah, national game, right? That was the he went to the national.
Yeah, it's not showing the actual games; it's just showing the records and then the combined scores.
You know what?
But 0-16.
I'll say this. Yeah, I'll say this. Georgia does play. Obviously, they play Arkansas this week, and they play Florida later this year. I mean, geez, the SEC, man. It is so brutal compared. This is why, guys, I have the SEC bumped up in my rankings, because these teams just go through the gauntlet. And it really should be like SEC every year in the Final Four based on their schedule. Like, I don't know why we punish these teams so much. But yeah, I mean, Georgia, they got Auburn next week too. They're number 22. Florida 2 weeks after that,
Auburn,
and then
okay, I'm sorry, but Auburn almost lost to. They had like a last second. They were at home. I forget who it was.
Jared,
Georgia State.
Jared, I don't want to talk about Auburn. I don't want to talk about Auburn because they lost me a lot of money this weekend. Okay.
I'm just saying. I don't. That's not a big game against Auburn, because Auburn, they're not frauds because they weren't ranked very high at the beginning of the year. They're just not that good. So you want to talk about an SEC team that can be beat on any given Saturday? It's probably Auburn.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe the quarterback for Auburn got hurt in this game as well, but I could be wrong. And I think that's the reason this team just started
hurt, man. What's going on?
No, man. And don't blame like the lack of playing either, because the SEC played all last year too.
Yeah, see,
I don't know, but what was weird is like Auburn had an absolute chance against who was going to say Penn State. Yeah, so
they did. See,
that's another reason. Another reason why I moved Penn State down a little bit, because the Auburn doesn't look as impressive.
No, Auburn. Okay,
they were
weeks 1 and week 2, they played Akron, blew them out 60-10. Week 2, against Alabama State, 60-0. Like, I don't even care about those games. Why even play those cupcake games? Like, schedule legitimate opponents. I'm sorry, that just those to me are just those are bye weeks. I don't even count those as wins. Those are legitimate bye weeks. Their first game, which to me I'm counting as week 3, was against Penn State when you're right. They lost 28-20. It was a close game. They had a chance to win at the end. And then last week at home against Georgia State, they're down and they have to score a touchdown literally with like less than a couple minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And then the only reason the score was 34-24, so like the only reason they won by double digits, was because they got a pick 6 when Georgia State was trying to drive at the end of the game to score. So, yeah, no, Auburn, they shouldn't even be ranked in my opinion, because first 2 games, those are buys. You had one legitimate game against Penn State where you kept it kind of close, and then you barely escaped at home against Georgia State. They shouldn't even be ranked.
I mean, I don't disagree with you that. But like I said, I do think I don't have any articles here, and I don't have time to look it up. But the backup quarterback played 16 snaps in this game, so I do believe Bo Nix got injured in this game. Because Bo Nix is a solid college.
It's Auburn we're talking about. They
I agree.
4 or 5
and by the way,
in the waiting.
Let me just say this: it was 24-12 at half, Georgia State. Like, no excuses. No excuses. And again, that's why I punished Penn State. So I apologize for bringing them up as a legitimate opponent on Georgia's schedule. But I saw the 23. This is the problem with the rankings. This is the problem when you don't have me do the rankings every week. Because you have teams like Auburn still ranked in there, and then I get tricked into thinking it's a good game, and it's not. And then I bet Auburn plus something, and they lose by 40. So, Yeah. So, I mean, we probably move on to the NFL pretty soon. I think I wanted to just go over some of the other games just to tell you guys the games this week so you guys can get excited and what at least I think my bets will be. Jared, if you see any bets in there too as well, go ahead and throw them in there. Hey, you were right about your West Virginia last week. You were right about West Virginia. You called out Oklahoma being frauds, and if you guys bet with Jared Smith, you won some money. If you bet with Nick, if you bet an Auburn game, you lost some money for
See,
sure.
I don't really bet that much. Like, I got to really look at it and take a hard look. I feel like Nick sometimes is just like a little loose, just kind of, chucking money around. I think he's been doing well with. You've been doing well with your job recently. You got a little more cash flow coming in, so you're like, screw it. Let's just throw an extra 20 on Auburn. Why not? Turns out, didn't work this last weekend.
Not impressive at all. Let me get this schedule up. I don't know what's going on. My computer's slowing down on me, Jared. Slowing down. We're live on the podcast. Like I said,
we talked about the top three games of the week, which are the top 25 matchups. I mean, there's also 4. You got Baylor and Oklahoma State, but I don't even think we really need to discuss either of those teams.
Yeah, you have Arkansas and Georgia, and I know Arkansas, they're a pretty good rushing team, so that will be likely low scoring for college football, and it will keep Arkansas in the game. But, I mean, for them, I don't think Arkansas wins that game, but that Georgia minus 8.5 is ridiculous. That's going to be a close game. Like, I would bet that Arkansas plus 18 easy on that one. I don't think that's a blowout. I think it might be a double-digit win for Georgia, but I don't think that's 18 points. I mean, that's almost 3 touchdowns there. I think that's a little ridiculous. So I would go with that one. Michigan. Go ahead. Michigan, Wisconsin's a good game. Michigan needs to win that one by a lot because I think they're ranked a little too high. And again, we're getting the the Jim Harbaugh in here again, getting ranked a little too high. If Michigan struggles against Wisconsin, that's going to be a weird game. Jerry, go ahead.
They will. No, I got 2 bets for you. Is LSU hosting Auburn? Let's see. Auburn's plus 3.5. After what I saw from Auburn this past week, I think LSU is going to blow them out.
I agree. That's a very good one. And LSU again, they're only ranked low because UCLA beat them, and UCLA stomped on Stanford last week. UCLA is still a good team. They just messed up against Fresno State, I think. I think they just trap game.
I'm glad you brought UCLA into this because that was my next bet.
At ASU.
They're home 8, and ASU's getting 3.5. You taking UCLA?
No, that's a game I'm staying away from because of what happened with Fresno State a couple weeks ago. I don't like UCLA in like those 7:30 games. I think they get lazy, and I swear I think the players start to drink in the parking lot before the game. That's legitimately what I think. I was there a couple weeks ago. It looked like there was a couple players in the parking lot. Not calling anybody out, but those are almost 8:00 starts. Okay, that's ridiculous. Yeah, no, I mean a lot of good games this weekend, guys. And then we mentioned obviously we have Cincinnati, Notre Dame, Alabama, Ole Miss. I'm betting Alabama minus 14 in that one. Notre Dame, Cincinnati, I don't know, so I'm not going to give you a pick on that one. But yeah, I guess so. Watch for Arizona State this week. I think Arkansas. I don't think that's going to be a blowout, so I would bet Arkansas to not lose by 18. I think that's a pretty easy bet. And then Alabama. Pick him in there. Crushing Alabama. Lane Kiffin.
Alabama.
And so is Lane Kiffin not played Nick Saban? Is that what it is? He just hasn't played Nick Saban since
he hasn't played him yet.
Okay. I assume when he's at Tennessee.
Going off of what SB Nation.
But again, guys, remember when Lane Kiffin was coach of Tennessee, I assume Alabama beat them every single year. So, it's going to be a mismatch. But all right, let's move to the NFL, Jared. I started this podcast talking about something personal to me. So I'll hand it to you. The Monday night game was yesterday. The Cowboys put a stomping on the Eagles. Just tell me what you think about it, and then I'll get into my Cardinals a little bit.
Listen, I was obviously super excited, and I was live tweeting on the Cover 2 podcast. If you follow us, you probably saw a lot. If you don't follow us, you need to. But I wasn't surprised. So I'm not going to sit here and gloat too much because Dallas is simply the better team. Philadelphia is not a good roster as a whole. I do like Jalen Hurts, but here's the problem with Philadelphia: when you have a first-year head coach, a first-year offensive coordinator, and a first-year defensive coordinator, that's going to be a problem right? And when I believe 2 out of those 3 guys are like either in their late 30s or early 40s, that just don't have a lot of experience at that particular spot. When you're a Fletcher Cox, the defensive tackle that's been the captain there for seems like a decade, or if you're a veteran on that team, like I feel like it's just tough sometimes to have to listen to these young guys when it's their first year at that particular job. So I think there's a lot of holes that Philadelphia is dealing with. Obviously, just talent in general, but the lack of coaching experience I think is really hurting them right now. And it showed going up against a Dallas team that is relatively healthy, even though they're missing some guys on defense. Their offense just looks flat out beautiful right now. I love it. First drive of the game, they get the ball, and Dak throws like a 50-yard pass to CeeDee Lamb. I thought it was a touchdown at first, but he was called down to the 1. They ran the ball 41 times, which was simply amazing between Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard, the two-headed monster there. And that's not going to happen every game, right? Obviously, you're not going to be in control of every single game. You're going to have to pass the ball more. But I think it was great that Dak Prescott did not have to pass for 40 or 50 times and, rack up 400 or 500 yards. And that's great for stats and fantasy purposes. But Dak's line was 21 for 26, 238, and 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. He did obviously have that turnover in the end zone in the first quarter, but we'll let that one slide. In the end, they beat Philadelphia. It's a division game. I love it. I was tweeting, I wish they beat him by 100. Just completely put it on him. I don't want to hear from any Philadelphia fans until the offseason. Can't stand them. I hate them. But it was a great win for Dallas. And now they go into a week 4 matchup against Carolina that's missing Christian McCaffrey. So that's a big one there. So Dallas should take care of business next week as well and really start to separate themselves from this division, right? Because I just explained why Philadelphia is not good. Washington, who we thought was going to be the other kind of team to compete in this division, their defense looks like crap. They gave up 41 or 42 points to
43.
Buffalo. 43 points to Buffalo. And then we have the Giants that they're just not good. So really, this is Dallas's division to lose. As long as they stay healthy, they really should wrap this thing up. Do you have any thoughts on this game? I know you're watching it a little bit, but
no, I mean, it just what it did was it proved. I mean, like I don't know if anybody thought the Eagles were legitimate, but they're not. Like it just happens sometimes. The beginning of the season, some teams look really good, and then their first legitimate game, they lose. And we have a couple teams that have gone through that legitimate game this season, look a little bit more legit, and some teams that haven't played that legit game. We have Carolina, for example, playing your Cowboys, Jared. I don't believe Carolina will win that game next week, and they will not be 3-0 because they've had relatively, an easier schedule. And the Saints, we don't know what to think about them yet. So, yeah, I just think the Cowboys did what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be a high-flying offense, and their defense has looked a lot better than expected. And so the Cowboys look like a dangerous football team. They look like a playoff team this year. That's it. And the Cowboys will win the NFC East. So for them, they're in the best case scenario here because they just have to compete in the big games. They have to figure out what to do to get to the playoff or when they get to the playoffs. They don't need to beat the Rams if they I don't know who they play off the top of my head. They don't need to beat Tampa Bay. But if you look good against Tampa Bay, you can take some success for that. Be like, okay, well, if we play them in playoffs, I think we'll be able to figure it out and make adjustments and win that football game. You get blown out by those teams, that's where people start looking at you as frauds, right? Like I've said in college football. And so Cowboys have not looked like that yet. They played an amazing game against Tampa Bay already this season. So that was stupid of me to say a second ago that they're going to play them again this season. But again, there you go right there. They played a great Tampa Bay team, the Super Bowl champs, Tom Brady, and that defense, and they looked impressive. So, no, it's more about the Eagles. Just they're not a very good football team like we all predicted, and the Cowboys are a little bit more impressive than I thought this season, and they are for sure the best team in the NFC East. Real quickly, guys, we will not be talking about Carolina and Houston this week. We will not be talking about Indianapolis and Tennessee. We will not be talking about the Giants and Falcons. We will not be talking about the New York Jets. either. So we will not be going over those games specifically, just to give you a heads up. We talked about the Carolina just a second ago. I think Carolina is just they're 3-0, like a lot of other teams are right now, but they have not faced the legitimate competition yet. And I think that, especially with Christian McCaffrey out, I don't think they have much of a chance against Dallas. Now, to get to my Cardinals, they did not play a legitimate opponent this weekend. Was it entertaining, though? Yes. Yes, and I think this was absolutely a trap game for Arizona. It happens every year to my Cardinals. They maybe win the first game, lose the second game against a winnable opponent. Last week, they probably should have lost to Minnesota, but they have a competent field goal kicker, and Minnesota doesn't. And this week, I wouldn't even say struggled against Jacksonville. There's just some wacky stuff that happened. Obviously, you had, a 68-yard field goal attempt at halftime, return for a touchdown. Besides that, Jacksonville put up 12 points. Okay, so, they didn't really play that well against us. It really was a 31-12 game. And we beat that we're supposed to. And that Florida weather during day games is brutal. Okay, we saw what it did to the Packers. The Packers look completely different. So going into that game, I definitely didn't bet my Cardinals. I'll tell you that. I actually would have won technically, but the way that game flowed, Trevor Lawrence is not ready yet. They don't have a good enough roster, and my Cardinals did their job. So 3-0. We play the Los Angeles Rams in Los Angeles this week. That's our game, right, Jared? That's our game. If we can compete with the Rams, it shows we're probably a playoff team. If we get blown out, I'm not going to be happy on Monday.
See, I gotta disagree with you a little bit and backtrack. Not that we have to talk about Dallas and Philly, but when you were talking about Dallas, you brought up, and we've talked about this off air, right? Dallas week 1 against the defending champs, right? The whole ring ceremony, all that
stuff.
They
should have won too.
They should have won, and I was happy with the way that they competed. Obviously, I wanted them to win and not let Tom Brady, drive down the field and score again or get that field goal opportunity. But I was happy that they competed. Going into the week 2 game, when Dallas traveled to play the Chargers in LA, I said before that game, and I think I might even said it on the podcast, I said, okay, there are no more like moral victories because you proved that you can play against a very good and dominant team. Now it's time to go out and show that you can now execute in those specific key situations and actually win the game. Like, this isn't college football where just being Florida and competing against Alabama keeps you in the national college football championship race, right? Yeah. Like in the NFL, a loss is a loss, period. So to me, and this is where I'm looking at Arizona as well, like, okay, you've proven that you can compete with some of those great teams, and Arizona hasn't played the likes of the Bucs yet. So this is really their biggest test of the season. But for Dallas more specifically, like, there is no more just competing and playing well. Like, they went in and handled their business and beat the Chargers, which is what they were supposed to do, right? Like, they're like, I don't want to see any of these like, oh, they played so well, close games, but they couldn't finish it out in the end. Like, I don't have their whole schedule up. I just know that they play Carolina next week. They should wax Carolina. Like, you were a good team. Prove that you're a good team. Like, beat the bad opponents, beat the brakes off of them, and then compete really well with the good opponents and beat them at the end.
Well, let me say this, Jay. Okay, so what I meant by this was that the Cardinals, there's two things to this, why I said that. Number one is I don't think the Cardinals have played their best game this season. And they're still 3-0, and they're tied with Tampa Bay for most points per game. That's pretty impressive. So going into the Rams game, who I think now the Rams, realistically, if you just look at it, they're probably the best team in the league because they've beaten Tampa Bay. The Chiefs are obviously, the Chiefs lost to the Chargers, so I'm not going to put them. And the Rams are 3-0 with the best roster they've ever had, realistically. And so I think you're looking at the best team in the NFL right now because they beat Tampa Bay. And so, and the other part of this was San Francisco and Seattle, not for me, San Francisco, but Seattle look like frauds this season. And I'm not afraid of them. And I think the Cardinals will at least be able to take a game from each of them, and it will be simple. And they could take 3 out of 4 from those teams. But Seattle's defense is atrocious, okay? every single game, and their offense looked like crap against a not very good defense in Minnesota last week. And San Francisco, they're playing the wrong quarterback, and they don't have a guy to replace him. And Aaron Rodgers doesn't hate Green Bay this season. So I'm not afraid of Jimmy Garoppolo, okay? And so I think that's where I say we're looking at the top two teams in the NFC West here, in my opinion, clearly at this point. And so if the Cardinals are one possession away from beating the Rams, I don't have a problem with that. Because when you get to the playoffs, which I think the Cardinals would prove they are a playoff team at that point, you can make the adjustments. I mean, they can make the adjustments later in the season in Arizona because they play them again. So that's the thing about a big divisional game is you can just play them again. The Eagles, on the other hand, I don't think they'll ever beat Dallas this season, because they look so bad.
No.
It's a combination of the bottom teams in the NFC West looking like trash, and then the Cardinals. I don't think they played their best game. So it's like if we play the perfect game, we should beat anybody. That's kind of my opinion on this. It's going to be tough because the Rams are really good, but we haven't played our best game. So how could I say that we are a good team or a great team yet? I don't know. I don't know yet. Gotta prove it.
We'll find out Sunday at 1:05.
Absolutely. I'm gonna try to go if I can. But I don't think it's gonna happen. Here's the other thing. So we'll skip over this game necessarily because there wasn't much to talk about this, but we had history in the NFL, and it wasn't Matt Prater, and it wasn't the Jacksonville return for return for a field goal for a touchdown against the Cardinals. It was Justin Tucker's absolutely insane 66-yard game-winning field goal off the crossbar.
NFL record.
I mean, Jared, when you saw this, I'll just point to this. Is Justin Tucker the best kicker ever?
Yeah. I think he is because I think we've grown up watching him. Those can argue, or some can argue, that Adam Vinatieri of the Patriots when he had his long tenure was because the big kicks that he made were in the playoffs and specifically in the Super Bowl. So those kicks are a lot greater than just a week 3 away game at Detroit when Detroit is garbage, right? But I think Justin Tucker, statistically wise, is the number one kicker. NFL
I
history,
think
right?
It's obviously either Vinatieri or Tucker, and I just think Tucker hasn't had as many chances as like the Patriots are in the playoffs. They've been in the Super Bowl 7 times. Like it's not fair to Tucker that he just hasn't been put in that position. Justin Tucker can't get his team to the Super Bowl. Okay, he's a kicker, right? So it's like I think if Tucker was, we'd be talking about him easy as the best quarterback. He just he has another opportunity.
Right. And Tucker has a bigger leg. If I'm picking between the two, no offense, Adam Vinatieri, he's done in the biggest moments. I'm taking Justin Tucker every time.
Yeah, every single time.
What's funny about this game is obviously the NFC and AFC. You usually play a specific division once every 4 years, and then once every 8 years, you get them back at home again. So it's been 8 years since the Ravens traveled to Detroit. You want to know what happened 8 years ago when the Ravens traveled to Detroit?
What happened?
Justin Tucker beat the Lions on a last-minute field goal from 61 yards.
Oh, my goodness, bro.
I mean,
are you serious?
So if you're the Lions, you just
– You know what?
I don't know what to say.
That's that would have been the stat that whoever's broadcasting that game should have brought hey, by the way, guys, this thing happened, and this is probably why they're going for it from 66. Because the play before, they had about 8 seconds left, and Lamar just took the ball and chucked it out of bounds. They had time to gain an extra 5 or 6 yards, and he just took it and just chucked it.
I think
they trusted him.
He did one of two things. They told him in the huddle, you literally have one read, and if that read is not there, you chuck the ball away. Or like what happened in week 1 when Dallas played the Buccaneers and Tom Brady was marching down the field. He literally took 2 or 3 plays and just threw the ball out of bounds to just run the clock out. So I don't necessarily think the Ravens were doing that there because there was literally 8 or 7 seconds left. But I think it was all right, dude, you don't have time to run around and do your Lamar Jackson thing. You have one read. If it's not there, just throw the ball away. And I think that's what happened. It was we had Justin Tucker. We're going to try this field goal. He already got sacked on that same drive, which put them in that 4th and 19 to begin with. So I don't think the coaching staff was too keen or I don't want to say not confident, but like in that moment they were probably just like, dude, we don't need you scrambling right now. We don't want to be in timeouts. Just throw the damn ball away. And that's what he did.
Yeah. Well, that's great analysis there. You're most likely right. Lamar tends to get a little out of the control, and John Harbaugh's probably like, "Hey, we're not going for it on fourth down this week. You're going to throw the ball out of bounds, and we're going to give it to Justin Tucker, and he's going to win us the game." And the 60. Yeah, Justin Tucker likes the Detroit turf. Clearly. Sorry, Lions fan. And by the way, if you're a Ravens fan, your stress should be based completely on Marquise Brown, because Hollywood Brown missed 2 wide open touchdowns in that game too, on the same drive. So they should have won that game easy, and they did not. All right, Jared, let's move to a little more of the important games. I talked about I hinted at a couple games already. Los Angeles and Tampa Bay. What do you take from the Rams kind of controlling Tampa Bay? I will say this. Here's my opinion on this. Tampa Bay or the Rams have always been more of a regular season team. Tom Brady, obviously more of a playoff team, like a playoff guy, right? Like he loses some easy games during the regular season because I think he knows he's making the playoffs and that's when it counts. Tampa Bay last year too, they didn't have the best record in the league, And I just think you look what they did against Dallas and you look what they did against the Rams. I just think this is a product of the Rams kind of in some ways caring more going for this game.
I can't disagree with that. I wasn't really thinking that, so I was processing as you were talking. I can't disagree with that. I think this is more about the Buccaneers should be worried about their defense. And we talked about it all off season. They brought back all 22 starters, all 11 on offense, all 11 on defense. Bruce Arians, all the coaching staff, everyone, and obviously Tom Brady, the GOAT, was coming back. So far, through the first couple weeks, we've seen that their opponents can drive and put up points against them, right? I knew that this game would be more high scoring than not. I didn't think this was going to be a 16-13 game. Matthew Stafford is showing that he is the real deal, and that when put with a competent NFL team that actually has weapons around him, he can be successful, throwing for 343 yards, 4 touchdowns, and no interceptions, right? So that was great to see from his standpoint. But when I look at Tampa Bay, I know that they're banged up in the secondary. Like they've been for a couple weeks now playing their second and third string safeties. They're down one of their top corners as well. So I get it that they're not at full strength. But I mean, at some point, like, where is the depth? Like, giving up 343 passing yards and 4 touchdowns, I don't care who it is, if it's Patrick Mahomes or whatever. Like, that's not good if you are a Bucs defense. Like, as much as Tom Brady can be mad at himself for not doing more offensively, I wouldn't be surprised if Tom Brady went into the defensive room or just scheduled a team meeting and said, like, what are we doing, man? This is not good. Tom Brady threw for 432 yards. Now, albeit only 1 touchdown. But, like, if you just saw that stat line, took away the Rams stat line and saw Tom Brady threw for 432 yards and 1 touchdown, you're going to tell me that the Bucs lost that game?
Yeah.
Like, so to me, I'm a little worried about the Bucs defense. I think as the season goes on, if they can get those guys back healthy in the secondary, they'll be all right. And I agree with your point. They are more of a playoff team. But I'm a little skeptical of their defense, right? And they're not that just untouchable team that we all kind of were potentially thinking about going into the season. They can be beat. Right. And the Saints, potentially might have something to say about that NFC South. It's not just going to be a runaway.
Jay, I'll say this, man. This NFL season is looking a lot better than I thought in some ways, only because I think we thought Tampa Bay and Kansas City were just clearly the best teams. And oh boy, do I love that they both have losses to start the season. Like, this is great. How do the Cardinals have a better record than Tampa Bay and Kansas City, right? And like you mentioned, they're missing Sean Murphy-Bunting. They are missing Jamal Dean as well in the secondary. Curtis Riley, safety. Yeah, I agree with you, Jerry. I'm still going to stick with I just think that, again, with what Tampa Bay is dealing with in the injury category, I think they just said, you know what, this is a tough game for us. We don't need to win this. Not that they don't try, but I think that it's not like do or die like you'd see some other teams in these type of games. I think they go, whatever, we'll take our losses, and I think they're going to crush New England this week. I think. Oh yeah. Oh, no doubt. I New England we're going to see the defense barely let the Patriots score, and I think they're going to win that game by like 20. That's going to be
that game next week, which I'm so happy is on Sunday Night Football. By the way, the schedule makers obviously knew what they were doing. They weren't going to let this be a 10 o'clock game. This has nothing to do with the Patriots or Bill Belichick. Tom Brady and the Bucs are coming off of a loss in a primetime game, even though it wasn't Sunday or Monday night. That 1:30 slot is arguably one of the most viewed times in all of Sunday football. Going against the Rams in the new stadium, all that stuff. The fact that they lost that game the way that they did, Tom Brady's not going to sleep this week. Like he's probably telling his kids and Giselle, like, hey, I'm literally sleeping at the facilities. There's no way that he's going to go into Gillette Stadium against his former team, against his former coach, all those fans now rooting against him, and he's going to put a performance like that. He might throw for 432 yards. I guarantee you he'll have more than one touchdown, and they're gonna come in red hot. I think looking to completely dominate.
I agree. Tampa Bay -6.5. Bet it.
All day.
That's going to be one of my 5 for the week. That's going to be it. All right, Jared. Let's finish off the NFC here really quickly. I only have one question about the AFC, realistically, but to finish off the NFC, what do you think about Minnesota and Green Bay getting 2 wins over 2 NFC West teams? Like I made the comments about the NFC West earlier with the 49ers and Seahawks. What are your opinions of all the 4 of those teams? You got Minnesota. They almost beat the Cardinals last week. I mean, they realistically should have. And then they beat Seattle pretty handily. And you have San Francisco go in and they lose to Green Bay, who's had a very topsy-turvy season so far. And San Francisco barely beat Philadelphia last week. And so what do you think about all 4 of those teams? Like, who's the best team out of those 4?
It's to me, it's still the Packers.
Okay.
Last time I checked, Aaron Rodgers is still on that team. It seems like he wants to be there. And obviously week 1 was a fluke. He was a shell of himself, and we were all shocked when they got blown out by the Saints. But they came back week 2, showed who they were against the Lions on Monday Night Football. And then this game, this was, like you never want to say like a team is not playing great or like down during a game and they have to come back. But I think the fact that the Packers were down the way that they did with literally less than a minute left and Aaron Rodgers had to prove that he is still clutch Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
I think that's going to give this Packers team more of a boost than people think, right? Like him and Devontae Adams are still a fantastic duo, and they still have a great kicker in Mason Crosby. So I think that win and the way that they won is going to kind of gel this team more than they already could have been. And I think it's going to kind of catapult them into these next couple games going forward. Sorry.
Hey guys, remember Jared's Cowboys played on Monday Night Football last night. He clearly is not.
We're struggling a little bit. We're drinking some tea. We're trying to get the throat right, but bear with me a little bit. I don't really have too much to say about the Vikings because to me they're still frauds. Seattle's defense is hot garbage, and I think any team can put up points against them. To me, the fact that Minnesota beat Seattle at home doesn't really say much. They lost week 1 to the Bengals, and then they lost week 2, obviously, in horrible fashion when their kicker missed against the Arizona Cardinals. So to me, the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, yeah, he can put up points for you in fantasy, and they got Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. And on paper, they look like they have a nice team, but there's no way that I am picking the Minnesota Vikings out of those 4 that you mentioned. I'm still going with Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers.
I actually don't disagree with you. And I think I would have disagreed 100% after week 1. But, like, it just doesn't look like that. And even after week 2. But very impressive win, in San Francisco. Another kind of odd weather going into that game, too. It wouldn't have been the best for Green Bay when you look at that Jacksonville game. And they're impressive. I don't disagree with really anything you said. And I think that right now you're looking at the NFC North is looking a little bit better with their top 2 teams than the NFC West, Seattle and San Francisco. I just think that, those teams are proving that they aren't as good. It's not like the Cardinals that haven't proved it yet. Cardinals still up there, and they can prove it against the Rams, and the Rams have obviously proved it. All right, so moving to the AFC. Jared, I'm going to give you my my top teams here, okay, in the AFC, because this division's insane. Excuse me, not division. This conference is insane. First of all, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, They're not nowhere. I don't care about that game. Pittsburgh frauds. Colin Cowherd said something on Twitter. He said, in the NFL has literally changed its rules to make offense better, and somehow the Steelers have gotten worse. Like, right?
But there's a reason why they're worse. It's because of Big Ben.
Yeah.
Like,
so Jared, I legitimately think that any other quarterback would be doing better for them right now. Like that Big Ben is making them worse, and it's not the same word, but it's worse than Drew Brees last year. Because at least the Pittsburgh roster is not as talented. Offensively.
Pittsburgh and Mike Tomlin 2 weeks ago, the moment Cam Newton got released from the Patriots, Pittsburgh should have been calling his name.
He's still out there, Jared. He's still out there. I know. We'll get him.
They should have been calling his name. Literally the second that it became official that Cam Newton, obviously cleared waivers and was a free agent, Pittsburgh should have been all over. Jared. Because if you think about it, they've got Big Ben, who is they're both like the same big body type quarterbacks. They both can't necessarily throw the ball deep anymore or with a lot of accuracy. But guess what? Cam Newton can still run. He can still extend a play, right? And use his legs to pick up a first down or at least, try to find one of his receivers crossing the field. Big Ben literally looks like he's 50. Like, yeah, everyone's talking about in the offseason, oh, he's in the best shape of his life and oh, he could have a comeback type year, player of the year, all that stuff. Big Ben is just banged up. Like, I'm sorry, but like you look at the dude wrong and he winces because his body has taken too much. It is nothing against him. Father Time is undefeated. He's won 2 Super Bowls. He's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He has nothing left to prove for Pittsburgh right now, other than stealing money from the Pittsburgh organization, is he's actually hurting this team. If he truly cared about the Pittsburgh Steelers and that organization, those fans, he would have retired. Because what the product that they were putting on the field is hot garbage. And I'm sorry, that Pittsburgh defense is good enough to where they should be competing and not losing at home to the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, I know the Bengals are not the Bengals of like 8-9 years ago. They have a good quarterback. Their offense is starting to turn it around. But I'm sorry, this is Pittsburgh we're talking about. They do not lose at home the way they did to the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'm sorry to say it, but Big Ben, you are a major liability to this team. And if they want to do better, if they want to turn it around, they sign Cam Newton or they get Mason Rudolph or Dwayne Haskins or someone in there. Not going to say it's going to be an immediate turnaround, but we're looking at potentially Mike Tomlin having his first ever losing season. First ever. And he's been there for 13, 14 years? It's going to happen if they keep Big Ben quarterback.
All right, Jared, you could put in Cam Newton. You could put in Mason Rudolph, Dwayne Haskins, RG3, Blaine Gabbert. You could put in Colin Kaepernick onto that team right now, and it's going to be a better option than Big Ben. And that's no disrespect to anybody I just mentioned. The dude is just falling apart. He's not an okay human being right now. He should not be playing football. That guy, if you saw him as a dad in a Little League game, you'd be like, God, there's something wrong with that guy. Like, he's banged up. He walks weird. He can't bend down.
It's loyalty is what it is. It's loyalty from Mike Tomlin. It's loyalty from the Steelers organization. I get it. He won you 2 Super Bowls, or obviously he was a major part of that. And he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, and he's franchise forever. But at a certain point, I think it was even Bill Belichick that said this. And he said, I would rather lose a player a year too early than a year too late. And I think that's exactly what's happening with Pittsburgh right now. As tough as it would be to rip that Band-Aid off and say, sorry, my man, like, thank you so much for your hospitality and what you've done. We are now moving in a different direction. They're like giving in to, all right, one last hurrah, one last dance. And it's just simply not working. To whereas what they should have done was bitten the bullet and said, we appreciate what you've done, but we have to move on. Like, a year too early is better than 2 years too late. And right now, Pittsburgh seems to be 2 years too late.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. All right, moving into the AFC real quick. Jerry, we got about 5-10 minutes left in the podcast. I only really have a few questions here and be pretty, see-through with some games that are going to happen this next week. But first question, Buffalo Bills, they had the loss to Pittsburgh. Now they've had 2 impressive wins since then. Who's better, Kansas City Chiefs or Buffalo Bills?
Right now, Buffalo. Right now, Buffalo.
I agree, too. And remember, Jared, I said there was a little bit of concern last week, right? With Kansas City, I'm like, I don't know about this team. They looks like they're not a perfect team right now. And then look what they do. And by the way, the Chargers had every chance possible. Like the Chiefs, like should have lost that game multiple times. Like the Chargers absolutely deserved to win that game, and it was almost meant to be. Now I don't think nobody's arguing the Chargers are better than the Chiefs. So that's not every team can beat any team on any given Sunday. I mean, look at what's happened in the past. But I think when you look at the top teams, it's Chiefs and Bills, and I couldn't agree with you more, Jared. Who's more legitimate? These two teams, the Raiders or Broncos? Both 3-0. They're literally leading the AFC.
I don't want to upset our good friend of the show, Alex Silva, who's a major Broncos fan, because that defense is legit. And I do like what Teddy Bridgewater has done with that team. Problem is they haven't played anyone. Now, they've done what they were supposed to do, right? When you play against a bad team, I said this earlier when I was talking about Dallas, when you play against a bad team, you're supposed to kick their ass. It shouldn't be close. Right? They've only given up like a couple touchdowns all year long. They played great defense, and their offense hasn't really had to do too much. But I don't know. It's something about the Raiders, man. Like that week 1 win, that miraculous win against the Ravens, going to Pittsburgh after that Monday night win, right? Short week, traveling to the East Coast, early start time, and they just dominate Pittsburgh. And then, coming back, and obviously it was an overtime win against the Dolphins this week. But I think I would give the slightest of slight edges to the Raiders. But I think you can make a case for Denver as well. I want to see Denver play against a good team, and I want to see that offense be able to execute. Because like I said, so far, I don't think Denver's offense has had to, they haven't had to rely on them to win the game. It's all been on the defense. So I want to see that that offense get a little more creative, see what they can do in a pressure situation, and see if Teddy Bridgewater can actually lead this team down to score a touchdown when it counts. Because we know that the defense is going to keep them in the game. But can their offense do that? I'm not quite sure.
Well, I'll say this, Jared. You talk about teams earning it. They did what they got done. They beat the Giants, terrible. Jaguars, terrible. Jets, terrible. They now play the Ravens. They're at the Steelers, Raiders, Browns, Washington, and the Cowboys. 6 games in a row. So, we're going to see who really is real. And I agree with you. I think the Raiders are clearly the better team because they've already proven it. And the Raiders are really, really impressive. And when you look at possible playoff scenarios and playoff teams, I only see 7 legitimate playoff teams and then Tennessee, who's going to win the AFC South. So there's 8 teams vying for essentially 7 playoff spots. I don't think Miami's legitimate, especially with Tua out. The Patriots aren't very impressive. Obviously, the Colts are already 0-3. And then you have the Chargers, Ravens, and Browns, who are all, I believe, will end up being playoff teams. Let's just say this, Jared. Do you think the Chargers, this is my last question, do you think the Chargers are on the level of a Browns and Ravens, who we just expect the Browns and Ravens to make the playoffs this year? We didn't expect the Chargers. They get a big win against the Chiefs. They have a couple close games to start the season. They're 2-1. Are the Chargers on the level of the Ravens and Browns?
They are talent-wise, but I'm going to give you one reason why I don't trust them. And it's because every single week, and I'll say this, last week, the Dallas Cowboys, and even this week against the Chiefs in Kansas City, they will find ways to lose. I think they have to. I don't have this stat pulled up, but I know that they had 2 or 3 when they played Dallas, different penalties on offense for motion penalties or not being lined up correctly or a lineman covering up a receiver or something like that. And there was a play in the fourth quarter where the same thing happened. And it's how can you constantly make these same mistakes over and over and over and shoot yourself in the foot over and over and over? So to me, yes, from a talent standpoint, the Chargers are right there. I love what Justin Herbert is doing. That offense can be electric, but they just seem to find it always has to be dramatic. Why can't the Chargers just go out and kick someone's ass by 20? They can't do it.
No, they can't do it. And they got a tough schedule too.
It has to come down to the wire. And so I don't trust them on a weekly basis. I think they're a very good team and they can compete in almost every single game. We obviously saw that this past week, but I don't trust them going, you know what I mean? No, I'm sorry. They're going to find a way to lose. They're going to get a penalty. They're going to miss a field goal. Something's going to happen.
I disagree with you a little bit because I think the Ravens and Browns do very similar things, and it's just because we've seen them more in the spotlight the last 2 years with their quarterbacks that we give them a little bit more credit. I do think the Chargers are up there, and I do think that, like, they're competing against great teams. And, yes, they're making mistakes, but I think that's obviously easily correctable. Right? Like, the Cardinals started the season getting, like, 8-9 penalties in their first game. You look at the last couple of games, it hasn't been like that, right? And the Cardinals were the most penalized team last year. They're already looking a little bit better this season. So, and the Chargers, they play a giant Monday night game at home in LA, back-to-back games for back-to-back nights in SoFi Stadium too. That's interesting. We'll see. We'll see if the turf is okay after that, right? It's going to be interesting to see what that looks like, for sure. But hey, guys, we got to go. We got to end this podcast right now. But yeah. Football talk as usual, Jerry. Couldn't complain. We got a lot of big college football games. We got some nice NFL games on the schedule next week as well. Our teams with 2 games against undefeated teams as well. So I'm sure we'll be, drinking a lot on Sunday and watching those games and just as excited as everybody else. But
I'm going to say one thing really quick because we didn't get to talk about the Chiefs. Chiefs better get together, man.
Yeah.
Like I get it. They got Patrick Mahomes. They have anyone you can want on offense. I don't trust their defense. I think their defense is Swiss cheese.
Same.
Any opponent can score on them. And the Chiefs need to start to play better earlier in the game. They wait too long until the second half to put things together. And it showed this past week that Patrick Mahomes is actually human. He does actually bleed just like we do, and he threw a couple of interceptions. So we don't have time to really talk about it. But the Chiefs better get together. I'm not worried about them being 1-2. I'm worried about their defense, and I'm worried about them starting games off too slow. Yeah. So they need to, kick it into gear, stop being in neutral just because it's the first half of the season. Play with some damn pride.
Hey, it's a reason we put them 1-2 with the Bills, and they will play the Bills this season. So that's where we'll see, who really
they play
is.
The Bills in 2 weeks. They play. Yeah. They're at Philadelphia next week, or this upcoming Sunday, and then in 2 weeks from now, they're home against the Bills. Sunday Night Football.
Have fun with that, Philly. Have fun with the angry Chiefs team that has lost. Oh, my goodness. That's going to be crazy.
Shout out to Andy Reid. He just got out of the hospital.
Yeah.
I believe it was today or yesterday. He went in with heat exhaustion. So glad that he's out. I think he was back at the facility coaching today. So good that he's back.
We'll push the panic button on the Chiefs if they lose significantly to the Bills. We got to wait 2 more weeks, but we're not going to do it on this podcast. But this podcast is done. We'll see you guys next week for more football talk. Of course, like I said, big college football games. 9 o'clock, Yale is playing games you guys want to see for the first time ever this year.
Chase.
Of course, NFL game, and then we'll end off with a big Monday night game next week, Chargers and Raiders in LA. And if I'm at the Rams game, I will post on the Cover 2 podcast as well. All right, we'll see you guys. Once again, I'm Nick Nenad.
I'm Jared Smith.
And we'll see you guys next week.